Hello and welcome, fellow bookworms and film fans. It's that time of the week again. It is time for the contented narrative. Now this week I will be looking at not one, not two, but three books. So I'll be looking at the Darren Shan series. So I'll be looking at Cirque Du Freak, Vampire's Assistant and Tunnels of Blood. They were all written by Darren Shan. They were all published in 2000, and then the film itself was made in 2009. Now we'll be looking at three things. I'll be looking at how good are the books, how good is the film, and I will be looking at the plot as well. I've decided to do away with the overall because by the time I get to the overall, we've already discussed most of what it is anyway. So goodbye overall. Now, as usual, there are spoilers within this episode because I will be discussing it in its entirety, so do bear that in mind if you are watching this episode. So let's start with the books. Now, I actually love this book series. It's such, obviously vampire series are done to death. You're kind of sick, you've got Twilight, you've got Morganville vampire series, you've got Sookie Stackhouse series, there's loads out there to do with vampires. This one is very good. They're quick, easy reads. There's, I believe, 12 books. Sorry, I should have done my research. There are 12 books. Yeah, I've got them all on the shelf. So the 12 books in this series. Honestly, I read these 3 books in a day. It's so easily done. Literally, you can read the book in an hour, basically. The books itself are fantastic. The story is easy to follow. It's very well told. You sort of see it from the main character's perspective, who's decided to call himself Darren Shan, and then he starts off by saying, all the names have changed, none of these names are the same, all the things have, and honestly, obviously I know I'm only discussing the first 3, all of which are brilliant, like little nuggets there, but once you started reading them, you kind of want to know how it ends, and trust me, the ending is amazing. I mean, obviously Darren Shan also did write another series as well, but we are focusing on the vampire series. Now, obviously, what I love as well about the book series is it completely rips out the whole thing about the folklore of vampires. So, within the first book, he's like, I'm not scared of garlic, I'm not scared of crosses, like they can pretty much, he even like Larton Crepsley, who's like the main vampire who takes on Darren Shan as an assistant, he's like, well, we can die like normal human beings, it's just a lot harder to kill us. He's like, we also age as well, like we don't just stop aging, we do age, we just age at a very, very slow rate. So I love how basically, and also they don't feed full, so they don't drain the blood of their victims, but there's another faction called the Vampires, and they do drain their victims completely of blood, and that's kind of what's given them the bad press. And I honestly, I adore this. I adore the fact that Darren Shan has come in and gone, we all know vampires, we all know how it's supposed to work, however, this is how mine's gonna work. And honestly, it's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. It's got such an original feel to it as well, and you really do feel for the main characters, and it's kind of sat here, as I said, you read the first one, you read the second one, you just keep going, and I must have reread them thousands of times. Honestly, it's always a pleasure to read them. Honestly, I would definitely recommend the book series. I would recommend it hands down. It gets a 9 out of 10 for me. And as I said, I love the original take on the actual vampire parts of it. And I love the story from Darren Shan's perspective. And I just love all of it, to be fair. And it ends up with a very good story as it goes along. So the film. Now, I had to rewatch the film for this episode. It is not one that I would normally watch. I watched it when it came out because I was super excited because I love the books, and I was so disappointed. Now, I know that there's film narrative and book narrative, and I know all of that, but honestly, the acting is just over the top. It's very, like, comedic sometimes when you're like, is that what you were going for? But, like, literally you sat there being like, do these people even know how to act? And you're looking at, like, the cast being like, they are good actors, you see them in other things, but for some reason this film just felt camped up, and it just felt ridiculous. It might be the script, it might be the way that the script was written and the way that the director told them to go, but honestly it had me in hysterics. I didn't feel for the main characters at all. I really didn't. I just sort of, like, I was too busy laughing at, like, the over-the-top reactions to things, and it's like honestly, and I mean, when Darren Shan's best friend goes and realises Lawton Crepsley is a vampire, asks him to turn him, gets bad blood, suddenly he goes like proper full on like evil. Like I don't get it. Like he ends up joining the Vampanese in the film, which, you know, I'll discuss later about the plot on the book, but like he just goes full tilt to the other side, and you just sat there being like, you're a kid. And like honestly, the storyline made no sense. It just sort of like, you sat there and at the end of it you're going, I'm not entirely sure what happened. And I know that they were planning on having more films, potentially, because obviously they were building up this world, but it just didn't go anywhere because obviously a lot of people were just like, no, we don't like this. Honestly, I don't like it. Just, I personally would not recommend this film. I did not, I mean, as I said, it had been hysterics, but I did not enjoy it. It's not one that I can sit back and go, oh, nostalgia, or, you know, oh, at least it had good points, or, you know, I can watch it on a sunny afternoon or like a rainy afternoon or whatever, but I can't. I had to rewatch it for this episode because I couldn't remember the finer plot points, but I personally would never watch it again. And so that's how I feel about that. It gets a 2 out of 10 for me. That's being generous. So the plot. Now, obviously, we are comparing 3 books for 1 film, as opposed to The Hobbit, where we had 1 book to 3 films. Do bear in mind, though, as you saw, the books are slim. So we'll start off with Cirque Du Freak. Now, the film is called Cirque Du Freak Vampire's Assistant. Obviously, you got Cirque Du Freak Vampire's Assistant and then Tunnels of Blood. And I did check, and all 3 of the books are quoted as literature for the film. So I did double check my sources before I did this episode as well. So anyway, so the film starts with Darren showing off his perfect life. You know, he's an A-star student, he's got a fantastic mum and dad and, you know, and everything like that. And it's, but then he cuts class to hang out with Steve, who is his best friend. They get caught, and then he gets told that he can't be friends with Steve anymore. So he then comes to Steve and he's like, we can have a secret friendship. You could be my secret friend. Obviously, Steve is not impressed. However, the first book starts with us getting a glimpse of his real life. So his school, his friends, and his home life. It's a lot more of a loving atmosphere. In the film, it seems more like the parents, they're lovely parents, but they're very obsessed with must be the perfect grades, must have this, must have. Whereas in the book, they're a lot more laid back, they're a lot nicer, the sisters involved a lot more. You see more than just Steve as a friend, and him and Steve are like really friends, and Steve's not a bad influence, they don't cut class. He's just a bit of a rowdy student, but like you see as well a teacher sort of like knowing how to deal with Steve, because, you know, we all know people like Steve. Like, you think if you sat there and took 2 moments with them, he'll be fine. Like, he wants to learn. So anyway, in the film, the flyer for the Cirque Du Freak is given directly to Steve and Darren outside the school gates when Darren's going on about secret friendship. And it states that it's only in town for 1 night, so you must have tickets on that night. However, in the book, the flyer comes from one of their mates, and Darren, Tommy, Alan and Steve all pour their money together to buy tickets. And the flyer states that it's in town for a whole week. So they've got some time, but they realise that the best time to go would kind of be like a Friday night or a Saturday night. So in both, due to circumstances, only Darren and Steve end up going to the Cirque. But in the book, Darren's sister knows where he's going, and even asks for like a little treat to bring back. Now, in both, Steve is obsessed with old school monsters, knows everything about werewolves and vampires and everything like that. And Darren is obsessed with spiders. Now, this becomes a big plot point that Darren's obsessed with spiders and Steve is obsessed with vampires, because it's how they end up in the situation that they end up in. So the freak show begins. You get Wolfman first. In the film, he bites off the hand of a woman who is a freak who can grow it back. In the book, he bites off a hand of the audience member. Then these little people come running out. I'm not being derogatory, by the way. They are literally referred to as little people. Because we don't find out who they are or what they are until like right at the very end. So just please bear that in mind when you're watching this video. So you have 2 little people run out. They sew the hand back on and everything's fine and it carries on as it should. Then you get Alexander Ribs. Now in the film he just shows off his ribs, which like he's, I don't know, but in the book he's a very skinny man with bones like rubber who is a contortionist and can basically play his ribs like a musical instrument, which you'd think would be a lot more fun to show instead of someone with just the weird, it's just weird. So then you get Remus Tubellis, whose act is pretty much the same in both. He can eat whatever he wants, and like he can make stuff in his belly and bring it out, and it's like a light, like it's what it is. Now you get the bearded lady who can grow a beard on command. Now you get that bit in both. However, in the film, she's some kind of psychic, and when she asks for an audience member to participate, she picks Darren, sees his future as sort of like bleak and dark and everything like that, because she knows what's going to happen. In the book, it doesn't happen like that. She literally just grows it on command and then gets it, you know, goes back in. And she also can't speak any English as well. She speaks her own language in the book. But in the film, she can speak English, so you understand everything. So you then get Hans in the book, but not in the film. He can basically just run on his hands and do everything on his hands. Then you get Larton Crepsley and his spider, Madame Octa. Now, they come on stage around this point in the book, as I'm going through like the running list as it were, but in the film they're the last act to come on. And I'll explain their act in a moment. So then you get Gerta Teeth come on, who's got like really strong teeth. She asks people to slam things into them and bites things in half, and that's pretty much the same. You also get in the book sisters who are contortionists again. And in the book, the snake boy is the last act. Whereas in the, and he literally is just a snake boy. He just comes down with his snake and he looks like a snake. In the film, he also tries to play a guitar because he wants to start like a band or something. I don't know. Nowhere in the book. Anyway, so when Larton Crepsley and Madame Octa come on, you have Steve is obsessed with the Larton Crepsley because he knows that he's a vampire. But then Darren is obsessed with Madame Octa because Madame Octa can do loads of tricks and is a very well-tamed spider, although she is extremely poisonous. But he's like, I must have that spider. And Steve's like, I'm going to blackmail Larton Crepsley. I'm going to become a vampire. You see how their, you know, things change slightly. So anyway, so Steve then waits behind in after the show in both to ask to join Larton Crepsley. Because he figured out he was a vampire. However, due to Steve's bad blood, he's going to be an evil child. Crepsley rejects him. Now at this point, Darren saw this in the book. He saw it sort of like up in the theatre. He saw this stage and he saw it happen. He then runs home and doesn't talk to Steve for ages, basically. In the film, he is hiding in a cupboard with Madame Octa that he has decided to steal. Now he does end up stealing Madame Octa in the book, but not until a little bit later when he's sort of going around in his head, and then he decides to steal her on the last night that the circus in town. So anyway, in the book, Darren starts sort of like playing around with Madame Octa, even brings Steve in on the secret, although the minute Steve comes in on the secret, that's when Steve gets bit by the spider. But in the book, it's sort of like at home, he's teaching her tricks, he's got very good control over her, he's having a bit of a good time before Steve gets bit. Because Annie comes in, Darren's sister, disturbs them, and then Madame Octa goes, whew, straight in. In the film, however, it's a bit of a bizarre one. He literally brings Madame Octa to school, keeps her in the locker. Steve sees her in the locker, ends up accidentally releasing her, chases her around, tries to kill her. Obviously, she then bites him out of fear for her life. He then gets bit and Madame Octa runs off. So you literally just sat there going, well, that, fair enough. You know, bring a hugely poisonous spider into school where you can't control anything. Yeah, why not? Makes perfect sense. So anyway, at this point, Darren ends up going to Crepsley to make a deal. So the deal is he will become a vampire's assistant, which is a half vampire, if Crepsley saves Steve. Obviously, once Crepsley administers the antidote, Darren decides that no, he's not going to go with him, which we all know he ends up going with him. But it's a bit of a, it's sort of something being like, you can't really renege on a deal. I mean, he is only a kid, by the way, a bit of a blackmail, but it's fine. So anyway, in both, Darren stays in the human world for a bit before he ends up almost killing his sister because he's basically wanting to drink his sister's blood. So then he goes to Crepsley, but in the book, he also is like out on the playing field, and Steve starts getting a bit suspicious because suddenly Darren's quicker and faster and stronger. And at one point, I think he ends up sucking blood out of his friend's knee, who like scraped his knee or whatever, which is a bit suspicious. But anyway, so he decides to go to Crepsley, and basically he says, you know, let's run away, fine, whatever. But Crepsley's like, we gotta kill you, because if we don't kill you, they'll be searching for you forever and you'll never be free. So anyway, he gets killed, he gets thrown off a balcony, while he's got like some toxin or whatever that stops his breathing and everything like that. He gets buried and then gets dug back up. Now, in the book, Steve almost kills Darren as he figured out he was a vampire, and now Steve has decided that he's going to become a vampire hunter. And, you know, as Darren and Crepsley leave, that is when Steve has decided that that's what he's going to do, and that is the end of book 1. So then we're on to book 2, The Vampire's Assistant. Again, it's not very similar, but I'll just continue with the plot. So basically in the film it's now continued where Crepsley's digging up Darren, and the Vampinese, the evil faction, as I said, tries to abduct Darren, but ends up getting into a fight with Crepsley, and then they get away and run away to the circus. So then book 2 starts with Crepsley feeding on a scoutmaster, not killing him. Remember, these vampires don't kill, they just take enough blood to get by. And Darren's feeding on an animal. Darren decides like he will not drink human blood until he absolutely has to, and basically until he's dead. And it's honestly, in the book, it's such a heartbreaking, we'll get to it, but it's so heartbreaking when he actually does drink human blood. In the film, it just, yeah, we'll get there. So anyway, in the film, they have to run off to spend time in the Cirque because obviously they're being chased by Vampinese. Where in the book, they end up back at the Cirque because after a few months on the road, Crepsley realises that Darren actually needs friends. He is a boy. He's like a young boy. I think he's like 10 or 11 or 12 or something. He needs friends. He needs a life. So anyway, you know, back in the Cirque, Darren ends up with Evra, the snake boy, but also in the film there's a monkey girl as well that Darren has a crush on that just appears out of nowhere in the film for no reason. I mean, obviously, I guess they just needed to have a love interest for him or something. Whatever. But in both, Mr. Tiny, whose name is Destiny, they play on that quite a lot, comes to camp. Now in the film it's because the Cirque is harbouring Crepsley and Darren. In the book it's because he brought more of his little people to the troupe to help out, and he wanted Everett and Darren to look after them. Now we also hear a little bit more about the little blue-robed people. They don't speak, but they will help out at the Cirque. In the film we see their faces, but in the book you never... They deliberately say they wear hoods. You can't see their faces. You can't see what they are. Now, in the book, you've now got... They're in, like, this little local field, and you've got this little kid called Sam who is determined to join the troupe. And they also meet an eco-warrior called RV, and he is not a very good person. Now, you know... Sam is happy with how everything runs, he's happy with how they treat the animals, he's happy with how everything goes. RV is very suspicious of how the animals are treated in the show. He's also like, he's an eco-warrior, he's a vegetarian or a vegan, I can't remember exactly which one it is. And he's very suspicious of Wolf Boy and the snake, and you know, the little people eat meat, like a lot of meat, and so he gets very suspicious about that. Anyway, so, you know, they kind of like, they make this little friendship, Everett, Sam, Darren, and RV kind of like as the older man, makes no sense. But anyway, so in the book, this is still in the book by the way, RV and Sam are not in the film, not even close. RV comes around and frees Wolfman, who then chews off both his arms, and then goes off and kills Sam. Honestly, it breaks my heart. Like, Sam is such a sweet little boy that just wants to go on adventures, and it's just lovely. So anyway, in the film at this point, the Vampinese have attacked the Cirque trying to get to Darren, and have kidnapped Monkey Girl. Now, as Sam is dying of his wounds, Darren drinks all of his blood, but to keep some of his essence alive. And this is another little thing, is in the Darren Shan vampire series, is when you drain someone completely of their blood, you take on some of their essence, you take on their memories, you take on their feelings, you take on their characteristics sometimes, and it's a way to keep them alive. It's like a little bit of their soul, which honestly, that is such a sweet thing that Darren ends up drinking Sam's blood so that he can keep Sam alive, and it's so sweet. And it's the first time he drinks human blood. But in the film, he ends up drinking a little bit of Monkey Girl's blood just to end up winning a fight, and it's just, it's not as nice, I think. But anyway, so the second book ends with the camp moving on and Darren relying on Everett, to help comfort him, because obviously he's lost a friend, he's lost Sam, and he's had to drink his blood. Now, in the film at this point, as I said, Steve is now a Vampanese and has killed his old school teacher, who in the book, he actually really adored his old school teacher. For some reason, he decides to completely slaughter him in the film. And then we've got the third book, Tunnels of Blood. Didn't mean to throw that then, it'll be alright. So, Tunnels of Blood. In the book, it starts with Darren accepting his true nature. A year has passed. He's still going with the Cirque, but he's now sort of like drinking a bit of blood here and there, and he's becoming a bit more of a vampire. And also in the book, a little person with a limp that they call Lefty has started to kind of help out Darren and Everett and become kind of like their friend. And honestly, you have to read the series. I wish I could tell you, but you have to read the series. And in the book as well, we come across another vampire called Gavner Pearl, who is a vampire general, and he sends Lawton Crepsley and Darren, and then Everett kind of joins them off on a little mission that only Crepsley knows about, basically. But in the film, the Vampanese have left a little note for Darren to come home, as they've kidnapped Monkey Girl and his family. So in the book, Everett, Darren and Crepsley all part ways with the Cirque for a while. As I said, they've gone off on a little kind of mission, as it were, except Everett and Darren don't know this. They just think they're going to get some time away from the circus. And when they go to the city, Darren meets a girl called Debbie, who he kind of ends up having a bit of thing for, goes on a couple of dates, kisses her, gets to know her family. It's quite sweet, actually. And they form like a little relationship. And it seems like Crepsley as well, at this point, obviously they got their little relationship, and then they hear about all these bodies that have been drained of blood. So they assume, because Crepsley's been going off on his own at night, that Crepsley has been draining these humans completely of blood. So Everett and Darren decide to start shadowing him and finding out what's going on, because they believe him to be the killer. However, it's revealed to Darren that it was actually a Vampanese that killed all those people, and Crepsley was hunting the Vampanese. Now, as I said before, a Vampanese kills its victims and drains them entirely of blood, but obviously the vampire only takes a little bit. So the Vampanese then obviously gets foiled by Crepsley by taking this victim, so decides to kidnap Everett, kidnaps Everett and threatens to kidnap Debbie. So in the film, there is a showdown now between a Vampanese and Crepsley, and Steve and Darren, while Darren's family, Monkey Girl, is hanging from the ceiling. And again, this is where he ends up then freeing Monkey Girl, because she uses her tail to free herself. He takes a bit of the blood and ends up almost defeating Steve. Now in the book, Darren concocts a plan to draw the Vampanese out of the tunnels where Crepsley kills him, and then they save Everett and they kind of go off, and it's quite a nice little sort of end. But in the film, Crepsley kills the Vampanese to now start a war between the vampire and the Vampanese that he's been trying to avoid for years, which honestly, yeah, sure, whatever at this point. And Tiny then takes Steve away with him. So the film ends with Darren back at the Cirque, accepting his fate as a half-vampire. However, the book ends with Everett being rescued and Darren and Crepsley moving on and joining back up with the Cirque. So, the plot. Now, it took 3 books and butchered pretty much every single one of them. It tried to smush the whole Steve becoming a vampire, or what, a half Vampanese, doesn't happen until much later in the series, because he ends up being a vampire hunter for a bit and causing, Darren some problems. They brought in a love interest, which made no sense, because in the books, Darren has a love interest. Like, they butchered 3 books in one film, and that is an achievement for me. I mean, they've changed basically the characteristics of everybody. They changed sort of like the motivations. And that really sweet scene when he finally drinks blood for the first time, because it's Sam they completely changed to just drinking some blood off Monkey Girl. I really should have learned her name. And it's just, I felt like, honestly, they just kind of took the most basic points and kind of just made their own narrative, and it just didn't work, and it felt rushed and it felt harried. And what they actually took from the books, it's like they had 3 books to work from, and what they took from the books, they really didn't do well. And honestly, the plot gets a 2 out of 3 for me. Now, obviously, this is my own opinion. It always is. If you agree or disagree with anything, please leave it below in the comments. Don't forget to tune in every week for a new episode of The Content and Narrative. And if you click subscribe, you'll be alerted whenever a new video is available. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to always keep it contento.